Your heart hammers as you press against the cold stone wall, every breath fogging the lantern's weak glow. The spiral stair beneath the church's altar creaks with an agonized groan, each step closer to the crypt growing wetter, more fetid. Behind you, the hatch slams shut, plunging you into a tomb of dripping shadows. Ahead, torchlight dances on arched walls slick with dark moisture. You taste copper on your tongue as a distant drip echoes blood or water. You can't tell. The passage opens into a vast underground chamber. Splintered pews lie abandoned, and the air vibrates with low, ragged chanting. At the center, a circular pit brims with deep red liquid that seems to pulse, alive. Reverend Silas Ainsworth stands at its rim, his robes caked in mud and fresh blood. His voice cold and unwavering cuts through the chanticleer. By the source beneath our feet, we purge this land of unbelief. He raises a gleaming blade and slices his palm. A torrent of scarlet arcs into the pit, and the water churns like an awakening beast. He thrusts a chalice toward the trembling crowd, hooded parishioners stained with zeal, each clutching cups brimming with the township's own lifeblood. Drink deep, Ainsworth commands. You watch in horror as they obey, their faces illuminated by torchlight, eyes glassy, lips quivering. One by one, they tip the chalice, gulping the thick, metallic brew. Then, in a single heartbeat, the pit's edge crumbles, bodies vanish into its depths, swallowed by the ritual they fervently embraced. A final triumphant scream, part human, part something else, reverberates through the crypt. The pit's surface calms, but you know the horror isn't over. You are alone, and in the hush that follows you realize the source demands one more. You are the next offer. Before we venture further, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Tonight you'll uncover a buried conspiracy so dark it wiped an entire Ohio township from history. From blood-soaked crypts beneath church floors, to secrets sealed in stone, this tale will challenge everything you believe about faith, fanaticism, and buried evil. Stay with us. Once you learn what happened to Fairwood Crossing, you'll never look at a small-town church the same way again. Frontier Ohio in the 1820s was a land of promise and peril. The Revolutionary War's ripple reached westward, as veterans claimed land grants along the Ohio River, carving homesteads from dense old-growth forests. Townships sprang up almost overnight with log cabins, trading posts, and rudimentary roads, while surveys and speculators raced to map the territory. Families endured harsh winters, lean harvests, and the ever-present danger of disease. But they also shared a fierce optimism that this backcountry would become the nation's breadbasket. Into this rugged landscape rode the itinerant preacher. Unlike established clergy in eastern towns, these evangelists traveled by horseback or wagon, setting up camp meetings beneath giant oaks or in clearings carved near nascent settlements. They brought the camp meeting revival style that flourished during the Second Great Awakening days of impassioned sermons, ecstatic conversions, and communal worship that united worshipers across class and gender lines. Frontier life's isolation and the ever-looming specter of mortality made these outdoor revivals irresistible here. Faith was not a Sunday obligation but a lifeline. Religious fervor ran hot. Congregations formed quickly. Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians, each erecting basic meeting houses with shared labor. Tithes were modest, often paid in corn or cattle, but the sense of community was profound. Yet the same isolation that drove people to embrace revival also bred fear of outsiders and fascination with the arcane. Rumors of shadowy congregations drinking strange brews or chanting in the woods circulated alongside tales of native-inspired medicine men and runaway slaves seeking refuge beyond the Mason-Dixon. Secret sects thrived in the gaps between mainstream denominations. Some claimed divine visions granting access to hidden scriptures. Others vowed direct communion with angelic messengers. They met under cover of night in cellar vaults or forest glens, insisting that only the pure of heart could glimpse true revelation. Initiations often involved cryptic symbols burned into bark, scratched on doorposts or sewn into clothing. Word of consecrated circles spread on trade routes, whispers that a small band of zealots had pledged their souls to celestial forces, using blood and oath to secure supernatural favor. Courts convened sporadically, and sheriffs had limited reach. A preacher denounced a sect as heretical. Neighbors might take the law into their own hands. Mob justice, tar and featherings, forced banishments, served as blunt instruments to enforce social norms. At the same time, a handful of communities quietly harbored dissenters, free thinkers, mystics, and former soldiers scarred by war, all seeking solace in doctrines outside the established church. In this volatile mix, Reverend Silas Ainsworth arrived in Fairwood Cross. He was a man forged by Eastern seminaries and shaped by frontier hardship, preaching a puritanical gospel of total consecration. His sermons tapped into both revivalist zeal and apocalyptic dread. Sin had to be extirpated from the land before not just souls but entire townships could survive. He spoke of hidden well springs beneath Ohio's soil, ancient sources of purity waiting for the faithful to unseal them. Ainsworth's message resonated in a place where salvation often felt a matter of life and death. After all, a failed crop or a rampant fever didn't just harm an individual, it threatened the entire settlement. When Ainsworth offered both spiritual and practical cleansing through secret rites, many believed him. In Fairwood Crossing, the church became more than a place of worship. It was a bulwark against frontier chaos. But as the 1820s gave way to the 1830s, darker undertones emerged. The very secrecy that protected fledgling sects also shielded fanaticism. What began as revival meetings and whispered prayers slipped into rituals that few understood and even fewer questioned. The frontier's promise of a new life became a crucible for hidden sects to test the boundaries of faith, culminating in rites so extreme they would forever stain Ohio's pioneer legacy. In the spring of 1827, Reverend Silas Ainsworth thundered into Fairwood Crossing on horseback, coattails flapping like sermon cloths in the wind. News of his arrival spread faster than hawthorn blooms. A godly man from the Eastern seminaries, he claimed visions of Ohio's hidden wells of purity and promised a revival that would shield the township from frontier's perils. Fairwood Crossing was scarcely 3 years old, nestled between rolling hills and timbered hollows. Its 100 or so families eked out grain and livestock, worshipped under open skies, and prayed nightly that floods or fever would pass them by. Into this precarious world rode Ainsworth, carrying only a worn Bible, a flask of bitters, and unshakable conviction. Day 1. The open-air sermon. The open-air sermon. Reverend Ainsworth wasted no time. That Sunday, he set up a rough pulpit beneath a towering oak at Market Street's edge. Dozens gathered, farmers wiping sweat from brows, loggers leaning on axes, children perched atop wagons. As he raised his voice, deep, resonant, unafraid of wind or wagon wheel clatter, faces turned from cautious to captivated. He spoke of the source beneath the ground, a blessing awaiting those brave enough to unseal it. Our forefathers tilled this soil, he intoned, but the true harvest lies in hearts made pure. He called for repentance, baptismal renewal, a covenant sealed in blood. Many laughed at the radical imagery, until Ainsworth raised his flask and offered a sip of holy bitters, said to cleanse both stomach and spirit. Those who tasted declared sudden warmth, a tingling in veins. Word spread. Ainsworth performed miracle. The first blessing, Thorne's barren fields. Elias Thorne, Fairwood's self-appointed mayor and sawmill owner, was skeptical at first. A lean man with hawk's eyes, he prized timber over theology. But that summer Thorne's corn withered from drought. Neighbors' fields cracked, wells ran low. Thorne approached Ainsworth beneath the oak, cutting a raw apology. "Preacher, I'll try your blessing, though logic says you're lost." That evening, Ainsworth led Thorne's family to the new meeting house's foundation and poured water from a spring he claimed had tasted of angel. He recited a prayer as Thorne scattered handfuls of the water across the plowed furrows. Neighbors watched from their doorsteps, some in wonder, some in weariness. Weeks later, rain arrived. A gentle, steady rain that eased parched earth and revitalized Thorne's field. Corn arose green and lush, far beyond neighbors' plots. Thorne's harvest was celebrated at autumn fairs, and he became Ainsworth's staunchest advocate. Building the new Covenant Church, buoyed by Thorne's endorsement, Ainsworth solicited donations. Families gave what they could: rough-hewn logs, hand-forged nails, bushels of grain for the workers. By fall's end, a simple meeting house stood at the township's crossroads. A single room with shuttered windows, a pulpit of pine boards and a low loft for singing. They named it the New Covenant Church. Sunday services drew more than faithful families. Drifters and traders paused to hear Ainsworth's call. The church's lantern-lit windows glowed like beacons in the dark, and on cold nights, smoke curled from its chimney as neighbors shared bread and broth in the fellowship hall. Music, hymns learned from camp meeting revival books, rippled through supper hour air. Omens in the new year. By the new year of 1828, the church's blessings began to shade into mystery. First it was the birds. Flocks of blackbirds circled the steeple at dawn, their caws drowning out rooster calls. Then the livestock. Thorne's prized mare foaled twin foals, 2 colts where one was expected, both white-flecked and unblemished. Farmers from miles around came to see, whispering of divine favor, but the omens darkened. One morning, Marcus Riley, keeper of the general store, found shelves empty, goods rifled through. He blamed highwaymen, but no tracks led away. That same day, cattle near the church fence lay dead, veins blackened as though poisoned. The church's wells, once clear, ran murky. Ainsworth proclaimed these trials purification's flames, and urged renewed faith, forming the conclave of the cleansed. Behind closed doors, Ainsworth invited a handful of trusted souls into a covenant of light. By candlelight beneath the pulpit floorboards, he sketched circles on the dirt, words against sin. He led them in whispered confessions, then in laying on of hands. The first warding ended with Ainsworth dipping a blade into each member's palm, pressing crimson drops into salt in a small silver bowl. No one recoiled, only nodded, blood on their fingers as a pat. Those invited became the conclave of the cleansed. Mayor Thorne, Martha Caldwell, the doctor's widow, Jonah Pike, the miller, Sarah Greer, the innkeeper's daughter, and a handful of others, each hand-picked for zeal rather than piety. Meeting in the church's basement, where workmen had uncovered flagstones, Ainsworth taught them deeper revelations. The ground under their feet pulsed with power, Secret springs of purity waited for the faithful. Conclave members reported strange after effects. Sarah claimed to hear whispers in her sleep, telling her which neighbors harbored sin. Pike said his millstone ground smoother, but sang at midnight. Caldwell noted wounds healed almost overnight, though the scars itched like living things. The first secret rite. In March, the conclave sealed their bond with a clandestine ritual. Ainsworth hollowed a central stone in the basement, filled it with water from the church well, and added ash from burned sermons deemed unworthy. As the water turned red, he recited the covenant of the source in hushed tones. Conclave members stooped to drink. Cold metal cups touched their lips. The liquid burned, but they swallowed, pledging purity through sacrifice. When the water was gone, Ainsworth ordered the hatch sealed. Until the chosen day, each member left the crypt changed, eyes brighter, voices steady with conviction. Outside, the winds shifted. Drizzle fell on parched field. Neighbors hailed it as blessing. Only the wary sensed something darker, hidden beneath the church floor. Thus the circle was founded, a perfect web of faith, secrecy and unseen power. Fairwood Crossing embraced its new shepherd, yet only a few guessed the cost of the blessings yet to come. By midsummer 1827, Fairwood Crossing's golden promise began to rot. Reverend Ainsworth's harvest blessing, the scattering of wellspring water across furrows, had yielded bountiful corn for Mayor Thorne's fields, but in surrounding farms crops withered in concentric rings, stalks browning from the roots upward, as though some invisible blight radiated from the church. Neighbors whispered of death circles etched in wheat, and barnyards fell eerily silent. First whispers in the night. It began with sounds, soft urgent murmurs filtering through closed windows at midnight. Families awoke to indistinct voices chanting beneath their floors. Martha Caldwell, no stranger to unsettling sights, reported her home echoing with primal whispers pitched low and unrecognizable. She rose in the dark, lantern in hand, only to find footprints trailing toward the church on muddy ground. By morning the prints faded, and her doors and windows were locked from within. The disappearance of Old Man Harris. Old Man Harris was the first to vanish. He'd whispered doubts in the tavern, calling Ainsworth's wellspring tainted water. 2 mornings later his cabin lay empty. Harris's cane rested by the hearth. His Bible lay open on the table, pages stained with dew. A search party found no tracks, only his front door swinging in the breeze. Thorne, distraught, blamed Harris's wandering mind, but quietly, he slipped new boards onto his porch, hammering nails at odd hours. Jessica Miller, Jonah Pike's wife, reported her daughter Emma ill after sipping from a trough left out under the church eaves, water meant for livestock. Late at night, Emma complained of voices calling my name. By dawn, Jessica awoke to an empty bed, and tracks leading into the woods that stopped at a cave mouth stained dark. A frantic search turned up only Emma's straw bonnet. Jessica found her husband in tears, but Pike spat that child-eating wolves must have taken her. Though no carcass was ever found, hidden rituals unearthed. Meanwhile, rumors swirled of secret midnight baptisms in the church basement. A broken floorboard in the pulpit creaked open under curious feet, revealing a hatch descending into cold stone. Men who claimed hymns turned to muffled chants described water troughs, dug into the dirt, stained red. When Dr. Caldwell ventured to map the crypt, she discovered flagstones carved with spirals and arrows pointing to a central basin. She found jars once thought to hold holy water packed with ash and blackened root. Town meeting of fear and defiance. In August, Fairwood's elders convened on the commons, urgent and divided. Some insisted Ainsworth's miracles absolved all sins. Others demanded he prove his innocence. Thorne defended the Reverend. Our wells flowed more clear, Our harvests at least fed me. Caldwell countered with her crypt discovery. These rites go beyond scripture into sorcery. The crowd tore between loyalty and dread. One former conclave member, pale and trembling, pleaded for mercy. He claimed we sang to the pit until it answered, then fled into the night, never to return. The final omen before the fall. On the eve of the autumn equinox, the town's final omen emerged. A wagon carrying crates of seed grain overturned on the hill outside town. The sacks ruptured, spilling blackened kernels that sprouted stunted shoots of rotting corn. Dr. Caldwell identified an acrid chemical in the seed hulls, an herbicide never seen on frontier farms. Thorne ordered the fields plowed under. The townsfolk watched him shaken as he turned soil that yielded nothing but dust. Reverend Ainsworth's dark counsel, with the township's faith trembling, Ainsworth declared a second baptism of the conclave alone. He summoned the few who hadn't fled to the crypt under the altar. There, by torchlight, he revealed a hidden scroll, and only when our blood merges with the source can this blight end. He cut each conclave member's palm with a silver dagger and pressed their drops into the crypt's base. The water fizzed, glowing dim red. A hushed chant rose, soothing to the anointed, terrifying to any who listened. As dawn broke over empty fields, the conclave emerged, eyes ablaze, voices hushed, bearing no sign of struggle. The church's doors closed, locked tight. Fairwood Crossing, once alive with children's laughter and livestock calls, lay hushed, waiting for the final act that would seal its fate. The autumn equinox fell on a moonless September night, cloaking Fairwood Crossing in velvet darkness. A drumming wind whipped through the township, rattling shutters and extinguishing lanterns along Market Street. In every home, families huddled behind bolted doors, whispering prayers for protection. None dared protest when Reverend Ainsworth's bell tolled at midnight, its hollow clang summoning the faithful to the New Covenant Church for the final rite of purification. Summoned to the altar at 12 o'clock sharp, the church doors swung open. Dozens of parishioners, men, women, and children, filed in under Ainsworth's torchlight, their eyes wide with dread and devotion. Each carried a silver chalice etched with the church's spiral rune, now battered and smudged with soil. Their hearth fires had been extinguished, their fields lay fallow. Only this rite was salvation. Inside, the pulpits had been removed to widen the nave. The congregation formed a ring around the altar, upon which sat a great wooden basin carved from oak. Red ribbons draped the chancel rails. Candles lined every ledge, their flames guttering with the wind that streamed through broken windows. Ainsworth stood at the basin's edge, his robe stained brown and red, his face luminous with fervor. Tonight, he intoned, voice ringing off the stone walls, we consecrate Fairwood Crossing with its own blood. Only through sacrifice shall the land be cleansed of blight. The cleansing begins. He lifted a flint-forged dagger, its blade glinting in torchlight. With swift precision he scored his palm. Crimson welled instantly, dripping into the basin's clear water. The congregation stirred, leaning forward, breaths ragged. Drink deep, Ainsworth commanded, holding out his chalice. One by one, the parishioners stepped forward. Mayor Thorne, eyes glassy with tears, tipped blood-pink water to his lips. Martha Caldwell hesitated but obeyed. Her cup clattered as she set it down. Jonah Pike, kneeling, drained his in a single gulp. Sarah Greer's lips trembled as the liquid stung her throat. And when every chalice was empty, Ainsworth closed his eyes and muttered a final benediction. The basin's water shimmered, then darkened to gore. By this covenant, he declared, your sins flow to the source below. Chaos in the nave. A tremor shook the church. Candles snapped, plunging the congregation into flickering shadows. A low rumble rose from beneath the floorboards, a sound like earth cracking open. Congregants gasped, clutching pew backs. Children whimpered. The congregants recoiled, but Ainsworth raised his arms in triumph. Behold the gateway to purity. And the hatch beneath the altar shattered as rough-hewn stones gave way. From the yawning pit came a roar, an otherworldly chorus of voices. Some human, some bestial. Water sloshed over the basin's rim. Red sprays, spattering robes and pews. The conclave of the cleansed, the original 12, rose first, garments soaked in sanctifying blood. Then the gathered parishioners felt compulsion or collapse, driven by a force older than faith. Children wailed as unseen hands seized them. Parents tried to flee, only to trip on splintered boards as the pit's edges crumbled. The spectral figures drifted among the ring, touching chalices and turning water to ichor on contact. One by one, the faithful fell staggering, clutching throats, chest heaving with unnatural breath. Reverend Ainsworth laughed, high and triumphant. Your souls are ours, offering perfect purity. He swept his dagger overhead, staining the stone floor with his final drops of life. In the corridors beyond, families attempted escape. Martha's husband, Isaac, burst through the vestry door with axes and torches, only to find the church filled with dripping shapes. He swung wildly, wood splintering, but the specters passed through him as shadows. Earthquake of the damned. The groaning worsened. The ground trembled violently, toppling pillars and collapsing rafters. A fissure cracked from the altar to the back wall, destroying benches and raining dust. A bell tower, or what remained, splintered, sending timbers crashing into the nave. Through the chaos, the blood-drenched basin quivered. From its center rose a shaft of mist, coalescing into a dark figure taller than any man, its form rippling like smoke, crowned with a halo of dripping root. From its mouth came a sound more terrible than any scream, the earth's own heartbeat, pounding in mournful cadence. The last living parishioners, no more than a handful, cowered, eyes fixed on the writhing apparition. Ainsworth knelt before it, arms outstretched. Let the source be cleansed, he cried. In that instant, the specter extended skeletal limbs and drew Ainsworth downward. His scream echoed as he vanished into the pit's maw. The church's walls cracked wider, torches snapped out, the basin shattered, its shards raining downward, like blood-drifted hail. Aftermath. In ruins, when dawn's pale light filtered through shattered windows, the church stood fallen, pillars strewn, pews in ruin, a single altar stone jagged and twisted. The pit gaped like a maw in the earth, steam rising from its depths. No bodies lay amid the wreckage, no chalices remained, only crimson streaks led from the basin to the shattered hatch. Fairwood Crossing itself lay silent, smoke curled from chimneys, though no hearths burned. The few survivors, driven mad by horror, wandered the fields, whispering of voices in the dark and eyes beneath the ground. They fled north, leaving cabins empty, barns unlocked. When settlers returned months later, only splintered logs and collapsed beams marked the church's site. Locals avoided the circle of stone. Travelers spoke of the crying wind that circled the ruins at midnight, carrying the echo of that final scream, a scream that sealed Fairwood Crossing's fate and ensured its name would be spoken only in hushed warnings for generations to come. Years after the Midnight Massacre, Fairwood Crossing lay abandoned, its name fading from maps. The charred church's bones were scavenged for lumber, and the pit's yawning maw was filled with debris and earth. Yet the stones of the old foundation retained echoes of that terrible night, whispers in the wind that drew new generations to unearth the truth. Rediscovery by Father Malloy, 1905. And 1905, Father Joseph Malloy, newly assigned to the rebuilt Fairwood Parish, stumbled on an oddity beneath the sanctuary. During preparations for his Easter service, he noticed the floorboards near the altar sat uneven. Curious, he pried up a board to reveal a stone hatch ringed with rusted iron. His lantern flickered on ancient glyphs carved into the great spirals, drops and arrow-like marks pointing inward. Malloy hesitated, then closed and re-nailed the boards, marking the spot with a discreet cross in chalk. He confided only to the diocese's bishop, who forbade further investigation. "We must let the dead rest," the bishop intoned. Malloy complied, but each spring he felt the hatches pull a silent summons to peer into the buried crypt. The ledger unearthed, 1974. Decades later, when the diocese authorized a historical survey, local clergy discovered a leather-bound ledger tucked behind the modern altar panel, bore strange notations in Reverend Ainsworth's handwriting. His circle established 6/15/27, 91/27, 12 offered. Margins teemed with cryptic ciphers, a mix of Latin phrases, runic spirals and numerical tallies of souls consecrated. The final entry dated 9/22, underneath, a hastily penciled note, perhaps Malloy's own, read, "Yet the earth still breathes red beneath our feet." The ledger's discovery ignited renewed interest in Fairwood's lost township. Historians pored over microfilmed letters, while local legends swelled talk of missing families, unmarked graves and a church floor that hummed at night. 2002 archaeological excavation. In 2002, a multidisciplinary team from the Ohio Historical Institute, led by Dr. Marcus Keating, tunneled beneath the modern chapel's nave. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple voids under the altar area, rectangular pits arrayed in a grid consistent with mass burial trenches. Excavators removed flagstones to expose a series of mass graves, each roughly 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, 12 in total. Time and moisture had eroded skeletal remains to fragile fragments, skulls, rib sections, long bones arranged with chilling precision. The graves were sealed by thick limestone slabs, each carved with Ainsworth's spiral rune on one end. Between the graves, archaeologists found artifacts, remnants of wooden chalices, silver cup handles, and bone fragments encrusted with crystallized salt. One chalice handle bore the initials S.A., matching Ainsworth's signature in the ledger. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains dated to late 8. Strontium tests indicated the individuals were local, consistent with Fairwood family. No sign of disease or battle injuries appeared, only sharp incisions on wrists and necks, indicating ritual sacrifice. A crypt of echoes, in the deepest burial beneath where the altar once stood. Excavators discovered a sealed crypt chamber. Its rough-hewn walls bore charcoal black scorch marks. A collapsed wooden trough lay in the center, its stone basin still stained a deep ochre. Broken fragments of the ledger's leather binding lay scattered, as though a final frantic effort had been made to conceal evidence. But most haunting was the chamber's acoustics. When a single beam swept across the floor, the clack of wood on stone reverberated tenfold, an eerie echo that lingered long after the sound stopped. Team members reported whispers on the recordings, unintelligible until slowed faint repetitions of "purify, sink and renew." Appeals from historical societies and state archaeologists were met with a stern directive: reseal all crypts, remove public notices and consecrate the ground in a private ceremony. No human remains were to be displayed or studied further. On an overcast morning, A silent procession of clergy in cassocks and laity in mourning garments returned the remains to their graves. Limestone slabs were replaced, flagstones reset, and floorboards renamed. Bishop Harding declared the site hallowed dective. We bury not just bodies, but the sins of this church beneath consecrated soil. Since then, the modern chapel has conducted annual rites of at-one-ment, yet visitors insist the hatch's spot throbs beneath the boards, a dull pulse felt underfoot. Lingering questions. What drove Reverend Ainsworth to orchestrate a township's end? Why did the conclave believe sacrifice sealed divine favor and could no price buy redemption? The rituals buried beneath the church floor reveal occult's transformation of sanctuary into slaughterhouse. They underscore how ordinary faith can warp into fanaticism when power masquerades as salvation. The coded ledger, the sealed graves, the acoustic whispers in the crypt. They all testify that Fairwood Crossing's darkest secrets remain entombed beneath once holy ground, and those who sense the hatch's heartbeat at night know that some rituals, no matter how deeply buried, refuse to stay silent. Though Fairwood Crossing was erased from the map, its horrors lived on in the few who escaped Reverend Ainsworth's final rite. Their accounts, told in trembling detail, paint a portrait of madness, brimstone smells, and the unmasked face of the man they once called Shepherd. Martha Caldwell, frontier physician Mac. I should have died in that church. Age in 1827, 32. Location hiding behind the pulpit. I'd gone downstairs to fetch water for the congregation, Caldwell recalled, voice cracking. When I reached the crypt hatch, I heard chanting, not hymns but guttural, like beasts speaking Latin. I nearly turned back, but duty spurred me on. She crept into the crypt, lantern held high. Condensation dripped from low arches, mingling with dark stains. Flint torches lit the chamber's edges, revealing a pool of black-red water that pulsed as if breathing. I smelled sulfur, she whispered. Brimstone, unmistakable. It stung my eyes. Their faces bore ecstasy twisted into terror. Eyes rolled back, tongues flicking like snakes. At the basin's edge stood Ainsworth, face illuminated by torchlight, not the pious shepherd he'd seemed, but a gaunt figure, hollowed cheeks, wild eyes, lips peeled back in a feral grin. Drink, he hissed, voice echoing. Only in blood do we find salvation. She tried to warn them, but the conclave seized her wrists, their grip burning. They forced the chalice to her lips. The water burnt, like enclave seized her wrists, their grip burning. They forced the chalice to her lips. The water burnt like acid as she gulped, throat constricting. I spat it out, she recalled, tears in her eyes. That's when the ground shook, the basin cracked, water turned foaming scarlet, and voices howled beneath my feet. She fled upward, pursued by shadows that scraped pews and whispered her name. She burst into the nave as the massacre began, stumbling over bodies and broken glass. She crawled through a shattered window, lungs burning and heart hammering, leaving Fairwood and her faith behind. Sarah Caldwell, 10-year-old witness. I saw Reverend Ainsworth's face melt. Age in 1827, 10. Location clutching her mother's skirts. I was with Mama, young Sarah recounted decades later, voice quiet but clear. When the sky went black inside the church, I heard Mama scream. She remembered the pews collapsing under invisible force, torches plunging the room into dancing dark. Through the chaos, she saw Ainsworth stand atop the altar steps, lantern in one hand, chalice in the other. His cloak fell away, and his face, it sagged like wax, his eyes glowing like embers. She covered her ears as dozens drank, then the ground thundered. Sarah felt the church tilt, and voices roared in her head, voices of the dead crying out for release. She ran, fingers dragging down splintered wood, as the sanctuary swallowed families whole. She and her mother escaped into the night. Sarah never returned but spoke of the smell, rotten earth mixed with iron, so vivid that even in old age, she could taste brimstone on her tongue. Jonas Pike, the millwright, it was like the devil himself led that chant. Age in 1827, 28. Location, huddled beneath collapsed beams. Jonas Pike, whose fields first blighted, volunteered to stay behind that night to protect what remained of the township. He positioned himself behind a sturdy pillar near the church's entrance. Through cracks in the walls he watched the rite. I heard the water splash cup after cup, and every splash sounded like a gunshot. He saw neighbors, arms linked, chanting in unison, "By sin's purge, we rise." Then the hatch exploded outward, sending shards of stone flying. From the crypt rose a shape made of steam and screaming, a twisted silhouette that flitted among the congregants, its breath rattling their bones. Reverend Ainsworth looked at me, his face half human, half smoke. He reached out and I swear he tried to pull me down. Pike ducked behind rubble as unseen claws carved the air. The howling built to a crescendo, then cut off as abruptly as a snapped cord. In the silence he fled, stumbling into pitch darkness. He woke the next morning on a hillside, clothes torn, hands bloody, no memory of running until he was safe. He never spoke of what he saw again, but his wife claimed he'd wake at night, gasping, eyes glazed with terror. Miriam Walker, escaped servant. They said I was chosen for the final offering. Age in 1827, 16. Location bound in the crypt's far corner. Miriam, a young servant in Thorne's household, had refused to partake in Ainsworth's early ritual. When the midnight massacre began, conclave members seized her, dragging her into the crypt. She found herself among the doomed, tethered to a post while others knelt. They forced me to kneel, to drink. My cup shattered halfway. I remember shards cutting my lip. She watched as families around her collapsed, convulsing as if swallowed by unseen hands. When the hatch burst, she heard a voice, deep, resonant. "Renewal demands the final offering." The specter rose, whispering in Miriam's ear, "Be pure, be purged." In a moment of searing pain, her bonds snapped loose. No blade touched her. The cords simply gave way. She fled through the chasm as the crypt collapsed behind her, filling with earth and screams. When she burst into the night air, she was alone. She ran into the woods, guided only by the memory of brimstone and the echo of Ainsworth's chant. Collective trauma, and the Reverend's true face. From these testimonies emerges a portrait of Reverend Ainsworth no hymn could cloak. A man whose zealotry transcended humanity, whose face became a mask of smoke and blood. Survivors speak of brimstone stench, a literal sulfur smell that blanketed the crypt, and of windows that cracked with the force of a dark power unleashed. They recall how the walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if the earth conspired in the slaughter. And in each account one detail unites them. When Ainsworth stepped into torchlight, his features melted, lips caved inward, eyes aflame, revealing not a man of God but something primal, awakened by blood and darkness. In the hushed aftermath, survivors bore scars deeper than flesh, nightmares that replayed the final scream, whispers in the wind that called them by name, and the unshakable certainty that evil wore a holy face. They scattered across the frontier, carrying testimony no congregation would welcome, stories of families sacrificed in faith's name, and a church whose crypts hid murder beneath sanctified floor. Their voices finally heard, ensure that Fairwood Crossing's greatest atrocity remains more than a footnote. It stands as testament to fanaticism's reach, and to the courage of those who bore witness, when the veil lifted, revealing the Reverend's true face, and their own narrow escape from an earth-shaking horror. By the early 2000s, Fairwood Crossing's dark legacy had become legend, and a magnet for scholars. In 2002, Dr. Marcus Keating of the Ohio Historical Institute led the first sanctioned archaeological expedition beneath the modern Fairwood Parish. Their goal: verify accounts of buried vaults and mass graves, document artifacts, and bring closure to the township's darkest mystery. What they uncovered, however, blended history with something far more unsettling. Preparing the dig, Keating assembled a multidisciplinary team: forensic osteologist Dr. Elaine Webb, architectural conservator Paul Chen, and local historian Lydia Hayes. They secured a court order to open the hatch concealed beneath the altar floorboards, the same spot Father Malloy had marked in 1905. Sensitive to local sentiment, they conducted a blessing ceremony with clergy before prying the hatch's rusted cover. As floodlights pierced the church's nave, the hatch yielded with a groan. Stepladders descended into the crypt, revealing a stone corridor slick with centuries of moisture. Before their boots touched flagstones, the air changed, a heavy stillness, as if the earth itself held its breath. Mapping the vaults, using laser scanning and ground-penetrating radar, the team mapped a network of 6 chambers radiating from a central burial hall. Each chamber measured just over 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, perfect for a single coffin or waste trench. Thin layers of soil and debris had collapsed floors, but outlines were clear. Electric lanterns glowed on the walls, casting warped shadows. Webb knelt by the first burial trench and tapped her trowel. Listen. As she scraped, the clink of stone on bone echoed unexpectedly loud, then faded into a low rumble that reverberated through the crypt's arches. The team froze. Chen's voice cracked. Was that the scanner? They replayed feeds. No equipment accounts for subterranean humming. It sounded more like a distant chant, exhumation and human remains. Over the next week, the team carefully exposed skeletal remains in the central vault. 12 graves lay in a perfect circle, each sealed by limestone slabs bearing spirals and Ainsworth's rune. Webb documented cut marks on wrist and neck bones consistent with ritual sacrifice rather than defensive wounds or battle trauma. Artifacts accompanied the bones: fragments of wooden chalices blackened by age, shards of copper chalice handles, and crystallized residues of salt mixed with ash. One chalice handle bore S.A., matching Reverend Ainsworth's signature in the ledger discovered decades earlier. Webb sealed samples for chemical analysis. Chen photographed glyphs carved into the stone around each grave. As night fell, the team installed motion-activated cameras. In the morning, playback revealed brief flickers of movement, shadows gliding across the lens when no one stood there. In one clip, a trowel rose half an inch from the trench's edge, then clattered back. The team chalked it up to settling debris, or so they insisted. In daylight, audio phenomena, and wrathful echoes. To capture sounds, Hayes set up infrared microphones in the vault's arches. Late one night, when only the guard and 2 technicians remained, the equipment recorded a low, multi-layered whisper. The source calls, "Return ours." Playbacks revealed a second, softer layer pleading, "Release us, set us free." The words grew clearer and more anguished. Technician Mariana Soto, reviewing the files alone, reported unexplained static that would flare at the whisper of Fairwood, then die. She quit the project soon after, saying she couldn't stand the voices in her dream. Equipment malfunctions and unseen presence. As exhumation continued, equipment failures piled up. The ground-penetrating radar unit overheated despite cool conditions. LED lanterns flickered out in patterns. On at Ainsworth's rune, off at empty vault. A digital camera's batteries drained in minutes. Though fresh and fully charged, Chen's laser scanner glitched whenever he attempted to capture detailed images of glyphs. Each malfunction occurred near ritual markings. On one occasion, Webb returned to the crypt alone to rebury remains for respectful exhumation. The next day, she pressed the limestone slab into place, only to find it sliding open again moments later. As though resisting closure, she described feeling cold hands pressing on her shoulders and a heartbeat in the wall matching the chant playback. She hastened back to the surface, pale and shaken. Ethical dilemmas and project suspension. By mid-2003, concerns rose over the project's impact. Students reported waking from nightmares of shallow graves and red-stained water. Local clergy warned that disturbing sacred ground invited divine retribution. The diocese, feeling pressure, ordered an immediate suspension. Keating's team was ordered to recover the hatch, relay the floorboards and perform a final consecration rite. They complied with solemn ceremony, prayers, holy water and a pledge never to reopen the crypt. Before sealing the hatch, Keating placed a microchip recorder inside, set to capture any future opening or sound. Legacy of the Unearthed. The Fairwood Crossing excavation remains one of archaeology's most controversial digs. Officially, the crypt was resealed. Unofficially, amateur explorers and paranormal investigators have since probed the church's floors at night, reporting cold spots, rattling hatches and distant chanting. The microchip recorder, never retrieved, supposedly transmitted static-filled fragments to Keating's lab for weeks before going silent. Historical societies reference the 12 graves and ledger as cautionary footnotes in frontier history. Local folklore turns the site into dare stories. Teenagers challenge each other to place hands on the hatchboard at midnight. Few endure more than seconds before fleeing in terror. Despite the rituals buried beneath, Fairwood's true horror lies not just in the sacrifice, but in the echoes it left. The earth trembles beneath those who provoke it. Voices linger where atrocities were committed, and chalk runes once etched in faith remain scars on sacred ground. As night falls over the rebuilt chapel, the old stones rest under carpet and pew, silent, awaiting the next soul curious enough to pry them loose. And those who listen closely might still hear the crypt's wrathful echoes, whispers of purify and return, a spectral reminder that some pasts cannot be buried. In the chilling saga of Fairwood Crossing, we've witnessed how unbridled zeal can twist hope into horror, and sacred ground become a slaughterhouse. From Reverend Ainsworth's promise of hidden wells of purity, to the secret rites in a stone crypt, the conclave of the cleansed believed that only bloodshed could sanctify the soil, yet their rituals, mass baptisms in crimson water, murmured chants collapsing earth beneath church floors, and the final midnight massacre reveal a darker truth. When faith is weaponized, it shields evil as easily as it inspires good. These buried vaults and coded ledgers show that fanaticism thrives in secrecy. The same ground that once echoed hymns now holds the remains of families sacrificed in the name of cosmic renewal. Archaeologists and historians who dared unearth those graves encountered more than bones. They unearthed whispered voices, mechanical malfunctions, and an earth-shaking presence that insisted some pasts refused to stay buried. At its core, Fairwood's destruction sprang from a human desire to control the uncontrollable frontier famine, illness, uncertainty by invoking rituals promising absolute power. But in surrendering to Ainsworth's covenant, the townsfolk forfeited not only their lives, but their very autonomy. Their story is a stark reminder. Extreme devotion unchecked can pave the way for tyranny masked as salvation. Now we turn it over to you. What forced Reverend Ainsworth from revivalist preacher to orchestrator of genocide? Were the crypt's echoes supernatural backlash or the collective guilt of a town turned murderers? Could Fairwood's horrors have been averted if even one soul resisted the conclave's pull? Share your theories and insights in the comments below. We read every submission and may feature your perspective in our follow-up exploration. If this descent into zealotry and buried evil sent chills down your spine, please hit like and subscribe for more horror history mysteries. Tap the bell icon so you never miss our next journey into the shadows of the past. Next week we cross the ocean to unspoken terror in 1910 London, the asylum at Hollow Ridge, where doctors never left. We'll speak with descendants of patients and uncover chilling case notes that suggest the hospital's wards were haunted by more than guilt. You won't want to miss how compassion gave way to cruelty behind locked doors, and how the asylum's echoes still linger in empty corridors. Until then, remember, every cornerstone and crypt can conceal secrets. When faith and fear combine, the line between sanctuary and slaughter can vanish in an instant. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and when you stumble upon history's hidden hatch, ask yourself, are you prepared for what lies beneath?